What did school try to teach you that was obviously false? Story 1. That your permanent record would follow you throughout your career, scaring kids into being good by saying you'll never get a decent job if you don't try hard in school and behave yourself. Some of the biggest dickheads in school ended up with great careers because nobody cares about your grades, and be floats. I drew a picture of a butterfly in preschool and got in trouble for arguing with my teacher, because she said butterflies don't have legs, so my picture wasn't accurate. Story 2. A history teacher told us during class that Da Vinci believed he was a god. His explanation: he painted the Mona Lisa, which is supposed to be the perfect woman, and only a god can make something perfect, therefore Da Vinci believed he was a god. The teacher seemed so angry at Da Vinci for that, and went on a rant on how ridiculous he was. This was the only time something like this happened with this teacher. We were so confused. Story 3. We had a substitute tell us that condoms are bad because HIV is small enough to sneak through the tiny spaces in between the lattice of the latex. It was social studies period. 3 years later I saw him again for one of my science classes. He had us pass around this clipboard with some bullshit sovereign citizen-esque waiver, or agreement, or whatever you want to call it, basically saying we agree to view religious material. He had all of us sign it like a petition and proceeded to put on some weird God is great sort of drama movie. We told our science teacher when he came back, and he called the district and got the dude blacklisted. Story 4. I had a history professor who thought the Disney Pocahontas movie was 100 accurate. She argued with us about it, and the test was based on the movie. She also somehow had a relative or ancestor who was a key but also obscure figure in every major event in U.S. history. We had to remember their names and direct quotes for the tests. First day of class she told us the entire textbook was wrong and we would not pass the class if we used it. She was correct, because every single question on her tests was a figment of her imagination. Story 5. When they teach me the senses, like sight, touch, all those 5 senses, we started to talk about the sense of taste, and those MF tried to convince the whole class that our tongue has different sections and that we taste specific things in the sections. Like the sour things were only tasted at the left back of our tongue, the salty ones in the right front. When they told me this I didn't believe it, but all my other classmates did, and they made fun of me for not believing it. Guess who was right all this time? Me. All that about the sections of the tongue bullshit. Story 6. I was homeschooled to believe that the South had lots of reasons for the Civil War, and that the North made it an issue of slavery to have the moral high ground. Color me surprised when I read in the actual Articles of Confederation that the reason they were seceding was due to slavery and their reliance on the practice. Edit Constitution of the Confederate States, not the Articles of Confederation. Edit for those that need to be deprogrammed. This channel's Checkmate Lincolnite series point-by-point deconstructs all pro-South arguments in a humorous way. Story 7. Had a high school history teacher. She was originally from Alabama. Tried to teach the class that slaves were actually treated very well and that we were being taught propaganda. We were high school students, but we knew bullshit when we heard it. Someone must have said something, because the principal sat in the next couple of days and we got a more realistic view of what happened during the Civil War. Story 8. A middle school English teacher once told me there is no difference between then and then. I still think about it today when I write, as a professional writer. Story 9. The story about how George Washington chopped down a cherry tree. The origin of Thanksgiving and everything about Columbus. Oh, and I got an F on a book report once because the teacher insisted that the moon landing was fake and that books about the Apollo space missions are full of lies. In his defense, it was a really thick book and I'd wager the teacher was borderline illiterate. Story 10. It wasn't from my school, but a friend's their science teacher would constantly try to explain that uranium was discovered by America, though he just couldn't find out who did, even though when Lyle half the class showed proof that it was discovered by a German man in 1789. The teacher would refuse to listen to the class to the point where he would yell at the kids and hand it out detentions. My friend still doesn't know why he was so confident about it. Story 11. My third grade teacher insisted that the flat, unleavened cornbread was pronounced tortilla, and not tortilla. I corrected her during class one day and was suspended for the rest of the week. The principal said that if the teacher said that was how it was, then it must be right. Story 12. That because I don't believe in Jesus, I can't have good grades because Jesus gives knowledge to the most worthy followers. Also, it was fine that I was assaulted by a male student, because he was young and will find Jesus sooner than others. I guess that's what I get for going to some tiny Christian school in the UK. Story 13. In 8th grade ed, we were told that if males didn't have some sort of release their testicles would explode. Seriously, I have always thought it was intended for comic relief, but the instructor never did give us the "I'm just kidding" line. Needless to say, I went to Pound Town regularly as a child to avoid that fate. I ain't going out like that. Story 14. If you have with someone, it's like putting a piece of tape on your arm. Every time you have with someone new, you rip the tape off and retape with that same piece. Eventually it stops sticking, which is of course a completely accurate metaphor to why you will not have any kind of success in a relationship if you give pieces of yourself away to random guys. Also, female shoulders are bad, but never male. Story 15. The fact that it is necessary to follow the rules, and do as you are told, without asking questions. They annoy adults because they don't know the answer themselves. Story 16. That Columbus was a great guy and a hero, that you have to go to college to have any chance at a great career, that America is the best country. The American school system IMO is full of propaganda to keep the average developing American from thinking for themselves and believing the land of the free and American dream is still the greatest thing out there. If so, why is our country falling apart at the seams slowly but surely, and why can't anyone survive with just enough work? Story 17 got in an argument with one of my science teachers about narwhals. She seriously thought they were made up, along with bottlenose whales, puffins, and a few other animals. Made me start believing that you didn't actually need qualifications to become a teacher. Story 18 Christopher Columbus discovered America. That he was trying to prove the world was round, that he was a good person, etc. It wasn't until high school I found out how much of a shitbag he was and that Amerigo Vespucci actually discovered America, hence its namesake. Story 19 Colleges jobs are going to be looking at your Facebook and MySpace accounts, and won't accept you if you have any pictures of yourself drinking, smoking, wearing revealing clothes, or even the suggestion that you might do those things. Even holding a cup of water is too risky. You should just delete the whole thing or else you'll end up living in a gutter. Colleges didn't give unless maybe you're going to some kind of Liberty or Bob Jones University type place. Certain jobs might, but most do not. And now we know that when people do get fired for what they do on social media, it's largely not Susan was fired because her sister posted a picture of her drinking wine at a wedding. It's more like Susan was fired because she was calling people racial slurs and threatening violence while listing her workplace on social media. Story 20 I distinctly remember a video from 8th grade health class 2003 which said that you can get HIV from deep kissing, especially if you have braces. Only recently did I learn that that's totally false. I believed this for an embarrassingly long time. Story 21 Socialism and communism are the only viable way to run a country. Capitalism and money is an evil you shouldn't even think about. Him from Argentina, and this is taught from kinder to university. Story 22 I had a history professor teach that slaves were happy as evidenced by the songs they sang while working in the fields. I was one of 2 black PPL in the class. And I spoke up. The other person was a guy who could pass for white, and he didn't say a word. I was so pissed. This mfur actually tried to debate with me and tell me that slaves were happy picking cotton from sunup to sundown, wearing rags, being whipped and raped. Yes, this was taught in college in 1991, and people are shocked that racism still exists. Story 23 The Pilgrims and Native Americans had a feast together, and it was the first Thanksgiving. Travel forward to high school, and it turns out they celebrated after killing them. Everyone at kindergarten lied to us about that. Story 24 When I was a high school freshman, I wrote a paper that arguing that the disproportionate level of poverty in the U.S. of minorities was due to a leftover stigma from the days of segregation and slavery, that had those events never occurred, then it is likely difference in race would mean little consequence in socioeconomic terms. I was called a racist in front of my parents by the vice principal, had to write an apology to my teacher, and was given a week of in-school suspension. I'm still bitter about that. I'm still convinced I'm right. Story 25 The food pyramid that people would offer me drugs all the time. And if you smoked weed next thing you know you're out there hooking and freebasing PCP, still haven't been offered any free drugs yet. Story 26 Went to a private Catholic school till middle school. We were taught that humans interacted with dinosaurs in a science lesson. Let's just say that I struggled a bit with science once I got into middle school. Story 27 I specifically remember my Texas history teacher when I was in 7th grade who was adamant that the Civil War was not about slavery but was about states' rights. Luckily we all had an amazing teacher the year prior who made it abundantly clear that it was about slavery and came with several references. Story 28 Some bloke built a boat nearly the size of the Titanic out of, put 2 of every creature on Earth on it and lived there for a year. My psychology teacher would not leave her belief alone that females are way superior to males. Like almost every class day she would make a comment about it. The females all believed it, OFC. Story 29 Europeans went inside Africa to get slaves. No they didn't. Coastal African kingdoms raided inner lands to get people to sell them as slaves to Europeans. Africa was taken by Europe during imperialism. Story 30 That the SATs actually are important. I attended 3 different colleges, never once got asked for my SATs. Never took a SAT in high school. Yet in high school all of this nonsense about SATs. Story 31 My psych professor claimed that race was a social construct made up by people, and that there is no zero biological difference between people of different skin colors, which makes no sense because skin color and certain associated traits are literally genetic. I asked her how that's possible, and all she had to say was you share 99 of your DNA with a banana, obviously. Story 32 That Christopher Columbus discovered America, GTFO here, that every time you had with someone you gave them a piece of you that you can't get back, and if you have with many partners you'll have nothing left to give to your future spouse. This was public school in the early 2000s. Story 33 Apart from whole school thing being an employee maker for the rich, in history classes teachers always tell the wars as fights between good and bad. You are on the good side and the opposite side is evil. They unfortunately don't tell you there are sides in a war and every side is battling for their own. Apart from some examples like Hitler and Nazis, they teach kids the world is black and white, and we all know that at ISN gray, that I could be anything I wanted, right? Story 34 Physics is one of my favorites back in the days, but they teach you already proven false models of atoms, and in the exam they ask you what was Blabla's model and what was Abla's model, etc. Was so dumb for such a smart core subject. Story 35 That jobs care what color your hair is or in fact how you look at all as long as you're there doing your job. No, are given. I've never come across a job that has asked me to take my piercings out, hid my tattoos, or to dye my hair a natural color. Story 36 that the indigenous people of the now US just left. That the car was invented in the US, that the US won WW2 single-handedly, that the US was the first in space. Yanks just moved the goalposts. Story 37 that we all have equal opportunity. There are smart people, there are dumb people, there are attractive people, and ugly people. You can be lucky and in the right place at the right time, or just have a series of unfortunate events. There's no rhyme, reason, or logic to every success and failure you will witness. Just grit your teeth, bear with it, and keep putting one foot in front of the other. Story 38 my school told me there was some omnipotent being who transcended space and time, and knew all things, and created the universe and everything in it. What a bunch of nut jobs. Story 39 that all people on the internet are dangerous pedophiles and that you shouldn't use the internet to interact with other people. Teachers would support this claim with anecdotal stories about teen girls who were catfished and murdered by men. You guys aren't dangerous pedophiles, right? Story 40 it was once a well-known fact that the human tongue has discrete taste zones and that you can only taste bitter across the back of the tongue, sweet across the front, salty at sides near the front, and sour at the sides towards the back. So in second grade we were given different flavor waters to drop on our tongues to confirm the knowledge in our TET book. The teacher had put a drop of the bitter solution on tip of our tongues and asks us if we can taste it. I responded that I could. I get called a liar, accused of trying to ruin the lesson, and given 2 detentions. So a few years later it comes out that this taste zones thing was popularized by a psychologist named Boring who misinterpreted some research by a German scientist named David Pauly-Nig, and is 99 bullshit. Not only can we taste almost every flavor everywhere, many people have taste receptors on the roof of their mouths and even in their throats. It's almost 50 years ago, but I'm still bitter and salty about the whole thing. Mrs. Burden, I hope you're serving endless detention in a very straight-washed version of history. To the point I was astounded when I was an adult when I realized certain historical figures I admired were not in fact straight. That was mind-blowing. But it shouldn't be. Young LGBT kids should be able to see themselves in history. LGBT history is American history. Black history is American history. All of it. Also my 8th grade history told us the Civil War was about states' rights, and it wasn't a southern state. Story 41 the world is a meritocracy. In actuality success is based on relationships. People that other people like and want to be around always get the job, make the sale, get the promotion, end up as the boss. It's not right or wrong, it just is. Story 42 so there's 2 places people reach when they want to measure their heart rate. They either do the classic 2 fingers to the side of the neck, or the 2 fingers held against the wrist. I had a teacher in 3rd grade who was adamant that me measuring it via my neck was dangerous. It was only safe to measure on your wrist. Even at 9, I was thinking what are you talking about? I can only assume she thought that I, a 9-year-old, might apply so much pressure to my neck that I would pass out, 32 years later, and it still makes me irrationally angry. Story 43 America was founded on altruistic principles like no taxation without representation, and the founding fathers wanted X, that the British were oppressive and an awful regime that made the Americas live in rags. Nah, we literally begged the British to fight in the pre-revolution war, then got that they spent any amount of time attempting to recoup their money from participating in the war. Boston Tea Party was because we were getting taxed by the British because they needed to recoup costs from the war. Nah, we didn't get taxed more, we got taxed less. Bostonians threw tea into the harbor because England's cargo shipping companies would get full refunds for shipping English products like tea to the colonies, and therefore were incentivized to not ship tea from other countries which American smugglers would pawn off as English tea and charge pocket a premium under the guise of the English raising taxes. The British lowered costs to ensure 100 of their product was sold in the colonies and made it a fair price to boot, and we Americans spun it around and used it as a war slogan. Founding fathers have literal monuments in Washington that have a bunch of quotes from their private letters that state that the systems they proposed were designed for revision and weren't perfect. And yet people think they knew best when they literally admitted they didn't know what they were doing and just copied other countries' homework and tweaked everything that suited the first settling communities better. Story 44 a couple stand out. One that I would need cursive writing. I make about 3x 4x more than what I thought would be a good salary coming out of college. I literally never use cursive writing, never, not even a rare circumstance I have to sign something. It's just squiggle marks. 2 I remember being told I couldn't use calculators on tests because I wouldn't always have one available. Spoiler alert, I always have access to a calculator. And I'm not old, I'm a millennial. I'm not talking like I went to school in the 50s, just a backwards, outdated school system. Story 45 that everything they taught us was all important for our future. Majority of the stuff only gets taught to us in preparation of our exams, and we aren't actually going to need it in the future when we finish school. Story 46 you hold the power to change your classes. Just because your teacher put you in a lower level class isn't always right. I had no idea I could just tell them I want to be in the higher level class. Story 4795 was totally nonsense, so I stopped going at 14. At 16 I got a GED and went to college. Pure math. Then I went to trade school, master electrician at 28. Easy world if you reject what you're told. Story 48 you can't start a proper sentence with and or but, I don't think I figured out this was incorrect until I was getting my master's degree. Also you absolutely can end a sentence in a preposition. Story 49 ID say not thinking outside the box. I used to be a very motivated and happy kid until I was forced to go to a German school. I was so severely brainwashed it turned me into a deep depression and made me robotic. I feel like all of my authenticity and creativity has gone. Absolute prison, and I still hate it so hard I would like this system to be abolished.